I have never been very good at sitting in front of people and explaining my heart. That was never my style. I came from a generation where a man carried things quietly, especially the things that hurt and sometimes even the things he loved. At 89, I know people remember the movies. They remember the face, the blonde hair, the old photographs, the horses, the mountains, the Sundance story, the way Hollywood looked when we were all younger. But that is not what stays with you when the noise gets quiet. What stays with you are the people who saw you before the world decided what you were. The people who challenged you, forgave you, protected you, and left a mark. I never fully admitted until now. The first person I want to talk about is Barbra Streisand. I remember walking into The Way We Were in the early 1970s with a certain idea of who I was as an actor and as a man. I thought I understood restraint, subtlety, and the quiet power of holding something back. Then Barbra walked into the room and challenged all of that without even trying. She had a presence that refused to let anyone stay comfortable, especially not themselves. She was not quiet, not casual, and certainly not someone who drifted through a scene hoping the camera would discover something meaningful. She demanded meaning. She fought for it. She questioned everything. Barbra wanted to understand every word, every pause, every emotional shift. She asked why each line existed and what it revealed about the character. She wanted to know why Katie Morosky would love a man like Hubble Gardner and still refuse to lose herself in that love. That kind of intensity could be unsettling, especially for someone like me who was used to working in a more reserved way. I often relied on silence and understatement while Barbra embraced expression and emotional clarity. She brought everything she had into the work, her voice, her intelligence, her vulnerability, her impatience, her humor, and even her fears. At first, I misunderstood her intensity. I thought it made things more difficult than they needed to be. But over time, I realized that what I was seeing was not difficulty, but courage. She was brave enough to care deeply about every moment, and that kind of commitment is rare. We were very different people in many ways. I preferred space and subtlety while she filled every moment with energy and purpose. Yet it was precisely that difference that gave the film its emotional depth. When audiences watched The Way We Were in 1973, many saw it as a romantic story. And it was, in part. But for me, it was also about two people who loved each other but could not change enough to stay together. That truth made the story feel real. Barbra ensured that the romance never became too easy or idealized. She understood that Katie had to struggle, had to challenge, and had to remain true to herself even when it hurt. We spent long days working together, some filled with tension, others with laughter. There were moments when Sydney Pollack had to guide us, carefully balancing our different approaches to find the heart of the film. Barbra cared deeply about every aspect of the project, the music, the political themes, and the emotional journey of her character. Her dedication was something you could feel in every scene. I admired her for that, not in a superficial way, but in the deeper sense that comes from working closely with someone who pushes you to be better. She made me more aware, more present, and more willing to explore emotional truth. Through her, I learned that tenderness does not always come quietly. Sometimes it arrives with intensity, with urgency, and with a kind of beauty that is impossible to ignore. The next person I want to talk about is Jane Fonda. Jane and I go so far back that when I think of her, I do not think of one film or one year. I think of chapters. I think of youth ambition, confusion, confidence, aging memory, and the strange grace of finding someone again after life has had its way with both of you. We first worked together in Barefoot in the Park in 1967, and at that time we were still young enough to believe that time belonged to us. The movie had that lightness on the surface, that romantic comedy rhythm, but underneath it I could already see something in Jane that was much stronger than the material around her. She was alive in every moment. She listened with her whole body. She had a spark that made a scene feel less rehearsed and more lived in. Jane was never simply a beautiful actress standing in the frame. She had opinions, instincts, questions, and a restless mind. That is what I loved about her. She was not content to be admired. She wanted to understand. She wanted to grow. She wanted the work to matter. There was something fearless about that, even when fear was clearly present beneath the surface. I always felt Jane carried two things at once, great discipline and great vulnerability. That combination made her powerful. She could seem completely in control, and then suddenly you would see something unguarded in her eyes, something almost private, and the scene would change. When we made The Electric Horseman in 1979, we were not the same people we had been in 1967. Life had moved on. America had changed. Hollywood had changed. Jane had become more than a movie star. She had become a public voice, a woman who did not hide from controversy, and whether people agreed with her or not, they had to admit she was willing to pay a price for what she believed. I respected that. I may not have always moved through the world the same way she did, but I understood the cost of standing for something. Jane had that courage. She could walk into a room with the weight of public judgment on her shoulders and still do the work. What stayed with me most was how easy it was to find rhythm with her again. Some actors require effort. With Jane, there was always a current. You stepped into it, and somehow the scene began to breathe. We trusted each other without needing to explain too much. That kind of trust is rare, and it becomes rarer as you get older. Then, decades later, we came together again for Our Souls at Night in 2017. By then, we were no longer pretending to be young lovers discovering life. We were playing people who had already lost things, people who understood loneliness, regret, tenderness, and the quiet need for companionship. That film meant a great deal to me because it allowed us to sit inside age honestly. There was no need to prove anything, no need to perform youth. Jane brought a softness to it, but not weakness. She brought the history of a woman who had survived herself. Acting with her then felt like sitting across from someone who knew where all the ghosts were buried and still had the courage to smile. I loved Jane for her honesty, for her nerve, for the way she kept changing without losing the core of who she was. Some people pass through your career. Jane passed through my life again and again, and each time she reminded me that aging does not have to make a person smaller. Sometimes if they are brave enough, it makes them more true. The next person I want to talk about is Sydney Pollack. Sydney was not only a director to me, he was one of the rare people in my life who seemed to understand the parts of me I did not always explain. That matters more than people know. In this business, many people look at you and see the surface. They see the face, the name, the image on a poster, the thing the audience has already decided you are. Sydney looked past that. He had a way of watching quietly, almost like he was waiting for the real person to step out from behind the performance. He did not push too hard. He did not flatter. He did not waste words. He paid attention. We first worked together on This Property is Condemned in 1966, and from the beginning I felt there was something different about him. Sydney had intelligence, but he also had patience. He understood that actors are not machines. He knew that if you tried to force emotion too early, you could kill the truth before it arrived. That was important for me because I never liked showing too much too easily. I trusted silence. I trusted tension. I trusted what was underneath the line more than the line itself. Sydney understood that language. He knew when to leave me alone and when to come close with one quiet sentence that changed everything. By the time we made Jeremiah Johnson in 1972, our trust had deepened. That film was not easy. It was harsh, physical, stripped down, and connected to the kind of America I had always felt, close to the mountains, the cold, the loneliness, the hard beauty of land that does not care who you are. Sydney understood that world too. He understood that the character did not need speeches. He needed weather, silence, hunger, and loss. Making that film with him felt less like performing and more like surviving inside a story. That was Sydney's gift. He could make a film feel lived in. Then came The Way We Were in 1973, and Sydney had to stand between two very different forces, Barbara's intensity and my restraint. A weaker director might have chosen one side. Sydney found the movie between us. He understood that the tension was not a problem. It was the pulse. He knew that Hubble and Katie had to love each other and fail each other at the same time. That is not easy to direct. Love stories often become too clean. Sydney allowed the mess to remain human. With 3 Days of the Condor in 1975, he caught something else in me, the suspicion, the isolation, the feeling of a man who suddenly realizes the world is larger and darker than he believed. Years later, with Out of Africa in 1985, he gave me space again, but in a different key. That film had romance, distance, landscape, and a kind of sadness that suited both of us. We had been through enough by then to know that beauty and loss often arrive together. I loved Sydney because he earned trust without asking for it. He had the discipline of a filmmaker and the instincts of a friend. We argued, of course. Men who care about the work always argue. But underneath it, there was respect. When he died in 2008, I felt more than the loss of a collaborator. I felt the loss of someone who had helped shape the quietest parts of my work. Some people direct your scenes. Sidney helped direct parts of my life. The next person I want to talk about is Lola Van Wagenen. Before the fame, before the ranch, before Sundance, before people started speaking about me as if I were some kind of symbol, there was Lola. And when I think of her, I do not think first about Hollywood. I think about youth. I think about two people trying to build a life before they fully understood what life was going to demand from them. We married in 1958 when I was still searching for direction, still carrying more restlessness than certainty. I was not yet the man audiences came to know. I was a young man with ambition, grief, pride, fear, and no clear map. Lola saw me in that unfinished state. That matters. It is easy for people to love the finished version or the version the world has polished and praised. Lola knew the version before all of that. She knew the small rooms, the uncertain money, the long days, the silence I could fall into when I did not know how to say what I felt. She was there when life was not glamorous. She was there when being married to an actor did not mean premieres and photographs, but instability, waiting sacrifice, and the slow pressure of wondering whether a dream would ever become real. We had children together, we built a family together, and with that came joy, but also pain I still find difficult to speak about. Losing our first son, Scott, when he was just a baby, changed something inside me forever. There are losses that do not leave a clean scar. They stay underneath everything. Lola carried that loss too. People sometimes look at a public life and forget the private rooms where a person is broken down. Lola was in those rooms. She knew the father before the movie star. She knew the husband who did not always know how to be present in the way he should have been. I loved her for her strength. Not the kind of strength people applaud, but the quiet kind that holds a home together when no one outside sees how much weight is being carried. As my career grew, the distance between the life I had and the life the world wanted from me grew wider. That is not an excuse. It is just the truth. Fame brings opportunities, but it also takes things. It takes time. It takes privacy. It takes the ordinary rhythm a family needs. Lola paid a price for my becoming Robert Redford, and I have never forgotten that. Our marriage ended in 1985 after many years and many changes. People like to make endings simple. They are not simple. A marriage can end and still remain one of the most important parts of your life. Love does not always disappear just because two people can no longer stay together. Sometimes love changes shape. Sometimes it becomes gratitude. Sometimes it becomes regret. Sometimes it becomes a quiet respect that sits deeper than words. When I think about the land in Utah, about the life I tried to build away from Hollywood, I cannot separate that from the years we spent as a family trying to find something real. Lola was part of that foundation. She was part of the man I became, even in the ways that hurt. I loved her because she knew me before the myth, before the applause, before the world started confusing image with truth. And maybe that is one of the most powerful kinds of love there is. To be known when you are still becoming yourself. And the last person I truly loved the most was Paul Newman. There are friendships in life that do not need to announce themselves. They simply arrive, sit down beside you, and over time become part of the way you remember yourself. Paul was that kind of friend to me. When we made Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, neither of us knew the film would follow us for the rest of our lives. We were just trying to make something honest, funny, dangerous, and alive. Paul had already become Paul Newman with those eyes everybody talked about and a reputation that could fill a room before he entered it. But the thing I remember most was not the legend. It was the ease. He had a gift for making fame feel foolish. Paul could walk onto a set and loosen the air. He had humor, but not the desperate kind. He was sharp, dry, playful, and confident enough not to need every moment for himself. That mattered to me. A lesser man in his position might have guarded the spotlight. Paul did not. He understood rhythm. He understood partnership. He knew that a scene could be better when both men were allowed to breathe. That is why Butch and Sundance worked. It was not just charm. It was trust. We found a way of moving together where the joke, the danger, and the sadness all lived in the same place. I was younger than Paul, and in some ways I watched him closely, not because I wanted to copy him, but because I wanted to understand how a man could carry that much attention and still remain grounded. Paul did not take the mythology too seriously. He could laugh at himself. He could puncture his own image before anyone else had the chance. That is a rare quality in a business that teaches people to protect their reflection like it is sacred. Paul knew better. He knew the work mattered. But he also knew the circus around it could make fools of us if we let it. When we came back together for The Sting in 1973, the connection was already there. We did not have to manufacture it. The film had style, music, wit, and movement, but underneath all of that, it had the pleasure of two men who trusted each other on screen. Audiences felt that. They still feel it. People sometimes ask what made our chemistry work, and I never had a clean answer. Chemistry is one of those words people use when they cannot explain comfort, timing, respect, and mischief all living together. With Paul, it was all of those things. I loved him because he was generous, not sentimental, not soft in the obvious way, but generous in the places that counted. He gave space, he gave laughter, he gave loyalty without making a speech about it. Over the years, we did not need to perform friendship for the public. We did not have to prove anything. The bond was there, quiet and durable. When Paul died in 2008, I felt that loss in a way I did not expect. It was not only losing a friend, it was losing a piece of my own history. A man who had known me when the road was still open and the whole thing still felt like an adventure. There are people who become associated with you because of movies, posters, and old photographs. Then there are people who become part of your private weather. Paul was that for me. He was laughter in the middle of pressure, steadiness, inside fame, and proof that two men could share the screen without fear and share a friendship without needing to explain it. I truly loved him, and I think some part of me always will. When I look back now, I do not see my life as a straight line. I see faces, I see rooms, locations, arguments, laughter, mistakes, and long silences that meant more than speeches. I see Barbara with all that fire-forcing truth into a love story. I see Jane aging with courage and refusing to become smaller. I see Sydney behind the camera understanding what I could not always say. I see Lola before all of it, before the name became larger than the man. And I see Paul laughing somewhere in the corner of my memory, making the whole strange business feel lighter than it was. That is what love becomes when you have lived long enough. It is not always romance. It is not always easy. It is not always permanent in the way we want it to be. Sometimes love is respect. Sometimes it is gratitude. Sometimes it is regret. Sometimes it is the person who challenged you, the person who forgave you, the person who saw you before the world created its own version of you. If my films remain, I am grateful. If people still watch them, I am honored. But the people I loved are the real measure of the journey. They were the ones who made the work deeper, the losses bearable, and the silence less lonely. And in the end, that is what stays.